So there's a part of this Gaza deal that didn't make the headlines, and I want to explain it to you. Because once you understand what the U.S. actually agreed to, the whole thing changes. Quick thing before we get into it. Drop the country you're watching from in the comments so I know where everyone's tuning in today. I actually read them. Something happened in Washington yesterday, and if you're just scanning the news, it probably sounds like progress. Like maybe, finally, this nightmare in Gaza is moving toward an end. But I spent the morning going back through exactly what was agreed to, and the more I read, the clearer it got that this wasn't a peace deal. Not really. It was something else entirely. Here's what we know. The U.S. Board of Peace met with Prime Minister Netanyahu, and they announced what they're calling a common understanding of objectives. Sounds nice, right? Civilized, diplomatic. But here's the detail everybody's skating past. The agreement says Israeli troops will only begin withdrawing from Gaza after Hamas completes its disarmament, after they hand over every weapon, every tunnel, every last bullet. Now ask yourself, what does that actually mean on the ground? Let me walk you through what happened. The meeting was in Jerusalem. Nikolay Mladenov, the board's high representative for Gaza, sat down with Netanyahu. They hammered out what they're calling a framework. And the language is careful, almost too careful. It says the withdrawal beyond what they're calling the yellow line will take place after the decommissioning process wraps up. That includes light weapons, heavy weapons, tunnels, everything. Now, the yellow line, just so you know, is that military withdrawal line from the first phase of the ceasefire. It separates where the Israeli military is from where Palestinians are allowed to live. And that line isn't moving until every single weapon is gone. Here's why that matters. A senior Israeli official, Doron Spielman, he's the spokesman for Netanyahu's office. He told the Associated Press something pretty blunt. He said the Israeli military would not withdraw from Gaza before Hamas disarms. He said their intelligence assessment is that Hamas remains committed to rebuilding its military, not genuinely demilitarizing. And he used some pretty specific language. He said if they redeploy before Hamas is truly disarmed, the group will quickly expand its presence throughout Gaza, rebuild its infrastructure, and seek to carry out another October 7th style attack. Those are his words. So let's be real about what this means. The U.S. Board of Peace comes in. They say they've got a deal. But the deal is basically Israel stays until Hamas surrenders everything. And you don't need to be a military strategist to see how that's going to play out. Hamas has already said they're willing to disarm, sort of. A Hamas official named Ghazi Hamad said they're ready to hand over weapons, but only if Israel actually withdraws from Gaza and reconstruction starts. You see the problem, right? It's a deadlock. Israel says they won't leave until Hamas gives up its weapons. Hamas says they won't give up their weapons until Israel leaves. and the U.S. Board of Peace is sitting in the middle, pretending they've solved it. But here's where it gets really interesting, and honestly, kind of dark. While these negotiations were happening, Israeli airstrikes continued. Over the weekend, at least 18 Palestinians were killed, including children. The civil defense in Gaza said Israeli drones and helicopters carried out more than 10 strikes in just a few hours. They hit residential apartments, tents sheltering displaced people, civilian vehicles. So there's a truce being negotiated, and simultaneously, people are dying in the same territory where the truce is supposed to apply. And nobody in Washington is saying a word about the contradiction. And here's what really gets me. President Trump announced this deal on social media. He called it a major milestone. He said Israel was very happy with it. But Netanyahu hasn't publicly endorsed it. His own spokesperson said the publicly released roadmap does not reflect Israel's positions. Now ask yourself, why would Trump announce a deal that Israel won't even endorse? You see where this is headed? The Board of Peace is denying any disagreement. They said Israel was briefed extensively. But Israel is saying, no, actually, we weren't. That's not a minor detail. That's a fundamental breakdown. And it gets even more confusing when you look at the Iran side of things. Because just days before this Gaza announcement, Trump was about to launch a massive strike on Iran. He was literally locked and loaded, as he put it. And then he canceled it. He said Iran and other Middle Eastern countries asked him to hold off. They had a deal framework. He decided to call it off. But here's the part that's blowing my mind. According to Israeli officials, Netanyahu found out about this cancellation by reading Trump's social media post. He wasn't briefed. His military wasn't briefed. The entire Israeli defense establishment was in the dark for hours. A senior Israeli official said, "We were in complete information vacuum. Trump left us in the fog." Let me say that again. The Prime Minister of Israel, America's closest ally in the region, found out the U.S. had called off a major military operation against Iran by reading a tweet. That's not how allies treat each other. And now, just days later, the same U.S. Board of Peace is sitting down with Netanyahu, trying to get him to agree to a Gaza disarmament plan that he's already been publicly contradicting. You have to wonder if this is coordination or if it's theater. Or maybe it's something even more cynical. Think about what's actually being proposed here. Hamas disarms completely. Israel gets everything it wants, but they don't have to actually give anything up until after Hamas has already surrendered all of its leverage. That's not a compromise. That's a unilateral surrender dressed up in diplomatic language. And the timing? Well, Israel has elections coming up in October. Netanyahu's coalition is fragile. He's got hardliners on his right flank who would never accept a withdrawal from Gaza under any conditions. And the U.S. just humiliated him on the Iran thing. So now they're offering him a deal that lets him look like he's achieving security without really giving up anything. But here's the problem. Hamas isn't going to fall for it. They've already signaled that they won't actually disarm unless they see real movement on the ground. And you can't blame them. They've been bombed for 3 years. 50,000 people dead, and that's a conservative estimate. They've lost almost everything. The idea that they're just going to hand over their weapons on the promise of a future withdrawal, it's not going to happen. So what happens when this inevitably falls apart? That's the question everyone should be asking. Because the U.S. Senate just passed a war powers resolution limiting Trump's ability to launch military operations in Iran without congressional approval. It was largely symbolic, but it passed 50 to 48. 4 Republicans joined the Democrats. That's not nothing. The Senate's basically saying, don't start another war without checking with us first. And Trump, well, he's already shown he'll bypass them when he wants to. And here's the part that makes me nervous. The Gaza deal, the Iran cancellation, the public disagreements, it all points to a strategy that isn't really a strategy. It's improvisation. It's Trump making announcements on social media without telling his own allies. And that's not stability. That's chaos. Look, I've been following this for months, since last October's ceasefire agreement. And every time there's a breakthrough, it's immediately followed by a breakdown. Israel keeps striking Gaza. Hamas keeps saying they'll disarm, but only if conditions are met. And the U.S. keeps announcing deals that nobody has actually agreed to. And that's the pattern. It's not peace. It's a holding pattern. It's kicking the can down the road. And while the can is being kicked, people are dying. Children are dying. Tent cities are being bombed. And the people negotiating the deals, they don't even seem to be talking to each other. Let me tell you the one detail almost every network missed. The agreement says the Israeli military will withdraw from Gaza, subject to each side fulfilling its obligations under the agreed framework. That phrase, subject to each side fulfilling its obligations, is doing a lot of heavy lifting. Because who decides whether those obligations have been met? The International Stabilization Force and the Implementation Verification Committee, which includes representatives from the United States and the Board of Peace. Not Hamas, not independent observers. The U.S. So effectively, the U.S. gets to decide when Hamas has disarmed enough and when Israel has to pull back. And given the U.S. has already shown it's not exactly holding Israel accountable, you can see where this is going. The Board of Peace said the meeting with Netanyahu was constructive and detailed. They said there's an understanding of the ultimate objective, completing the decommissioning and transitioning from rule by the gun to civilian governance. Nice phrasing, but words are cheap. Bodies are not. And I want to be really clear about something. I'm not taking sides here. Hamas is a terrorist organization. What happened on October 7th was barbaric. No one should defend that. But you can condemn Hamas and still look at this deal and say, this isn't going to work, because it doesn't address the underlying reality, which is that there are 2 million Palestinians in Gaza. They're living in rubble. They're starving. They're being bombed. And the only thing that's going to end this cycle is a real political solution. Not a disarmament deal that gives one side everything and the other side nothing. And I think the people in Washington know that. They know this deal is structurally impossible. They know Hamas isn't going to hand over its weapons just because the U.S. says so. They know. So why are they doing this? Why announce a deal you know is going to fail? That's the question I keep coming back to. And I think the answer is because it sounds good. It sounds like progress. It gives people hope. It generates headlines. And then when it collapses, the same people will be back at the table trying to negotiate a new deal that looks exactly the same. This whole thing, it's not a strategy. It's a public relations exercise. And here's what I really think. I think the U.S. knows exactly what it's doing. They're giving Israel a blank check. They're saying, stay in Gaza, stay as long as you want. And when Hamas doesn't disarm, we'll say it's their fault. We'll say we tried. And we'll keep funding the war. That's the cynical reading. And I hate to say it, but the evidence is piling up. Because while all this negotiating is happening, Israeli strikes are continuing. Israel says they're targeting Hamas infrastructure. They say they're hitting, quote, military personnel. But when you bomb tents, when you kill children, you're not just targeting Hamas, you're targeting everyone. And the international community, well, the UN has been pretty quiet. The Board of Peace condemned the strikes, sort of. They said Israel shouldn't be bombing while negotiations are ongoing. But they're not doing anything to stop it. So this is where we are. A deal that can't succeed. A war that won't end. And a peace process that exists mostly in press releases. I want to go back to something I said earlier, the Iran angle, because I think it's connected. The U.S. canceling the strike on Iran without telling Israel, that sent a message. It said, we don't need you. We'll do what we want. And now the Gaza deal, it's saying the opposite thing. It's saying, we'll give you everything you want. We'll let you stay in Gaza indefinitely. We'll even pretend it's a peace process. Which version is real? Or are both true? Is the U.S. both abandoning Israel and propping it up at the same time? I think that's the heart of it. The U.S. is playing both sides. They're telling Israel, we're your ally. We have your back. And they're telling Iran, we're negotiating. We can be reasonable. And meanwhile, Gaza is trapped in the middle. This isn't about peace. It's not about security. It's about managing chaos. It's about controlling the narrative. And for the people of Gaza, that means the war continues, the bombing continues, the starvation continues, and the political deal that was supposed to bring relief is just another layer of the same impossible situation. I'm going to say something that might be unpopular. I don't think anyone in Washington actually wants this war to end. Not really. Because ending the war would require compromise. It would require acknowledging that Israel's actions have been brutal. It would require holding Hamas accountable while also holding Israel accountable. And nobody has the political will to do that. So instead, we get this: a peace process that's not a peace process, a disarmed that's not a disarmed, a withdrawal that's not a withdrawal. It's all theater. It's all noise. But here's what I want you to take away from this. And I mean really take away. This deal isn't about Gaza. It's about Israel's elections. It's about Trump's legacy. It's about the U.S.-Iran relationship. It's about everything except the 2 million human beings who are living through a nightmare. And that's why it won't work. Because if you're not actually solving the problem, you're just rearranging the furniture while the house burns down. I keep thinking about that phrase the Board of Peace used: transitioning from rule by the gun to civilian governance. It sounds so clean, so orderly, like you just flip a switch and suddenly everything's different. But in reality, the rule by the gun is what's been happening for 3 years. And the civilian governance they're talking about, it's not even in place yet. It's a committee, a Palestinian technocratic committee. That doesn't exist. And even if it did, would anyone trust it? Would anyone believe it could actually govern? And that's the thing. This whole agreement is built on a foundation of trust that doesn't exist. Israel doesn't trust Hamas. Hamas doesn't trust Israel. The Palestinians don't trust the U.S. And the U.S. doesn't trust anyone. It's a recipe for failure. But maybe that's the point. Maybe it's supposed to fail, because when it fails, Israel can say, "See, we tried. They wouldn't disarm." And Hamas can say, "See, they never intended to leave." And the U.S. can say, "We did everything we could. and everyone can go back to doing exactly what they were doing before. War. More war. And more death. I don't want to end on that note. I want to give you some hope. But honestly, I'm having a hard time finding it. The fighting continues. The political theatrics continue. And the lives of ordinary people, Palestinians, Israelis, everyone caught in this nightmare, they're being treated like collateral damage in a bigger game that nobody elected them to play. I'll keep watching this. I'll keep reading the reports. I'll keep telling you what I find, because I think it matters, even if nobody in Washington is listening, even if the deal collapses, even if the war never ends, because the truth matters. And right now, nobody is telling it. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to keep following this, and I'm going to keep showing up to tell you what I see, because I think you deserve to know what's actually happening, not just what they're telling you on the news. And I want to know what you think. You're watching this from wherever you are, and you have your own perspective. You have your own questions. Drop them in the comments. Tell me what you make of this, because honestly, I went back and forth myself. The question I keep coming back to, and I'll leave you with this. The question is, when does a peace deal become a weapon? When does the promise of peace become the justification for more war? Because that's what we're looking at right now. And I don't think anyone in Washington is asking that question. But you are, and I am. And that's the only way anything changes. This isn't over, not by a long shot. I'll be back tomorrow with more. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the next one.